I want to welcome for the Akademie der Künste Chris Bohn, it's here in the middle, from the English magazine The Wire, who was the first Western music journalist to travel through parts of Eastern Europe at the beginning of the 1980s in search of this region's underground. And Alexander Pehlemann, here to my right, co-curator from the Portuguese project Unearthing the Music, which makes the experimental music of real socialism available online, and produced the compilation. They discussed together with David Crowley, the English-based curator from the Notes exhibition, what is still to be discovered in the Eastern sounds soon that were not or only barely caught up in any pipe. Around 7 p.m. we have a talk and music intervention with Frank Bretschnatter, one of the founders of the band AG Geiger, with the other Notes curator Daniel Musicek from the Museum Stupi in Lodz. So I hope us a very good evening, and for every day we have such kind of paper and to put it formally. And when you want to come, also come here or sit down there.
So you're a long way away. Thank you so much for coming this evening. This is going to be a slightly unstructured conversation, but I thought maybe if I just said a word or two, and that's to reinforce what Angela's just said, that this exhibition outside that I worked on with Angela and primarily with Daniel Musicek, who's here in the front row, is the product of a lot of work, and I have to be honest and say that sometimes it's not just our work. We've been very reliant on the work of other people, and maybe this exhibition, the Notes from the Underground side of the exhibition, which explores the interface of art and music in Eastern Europe under the kind of impact of rock and punk and new wave. In some ways this is we'd like to claim it's a pioneering exhibition, but that's a bit of an exaggeration because other people have been in this space before, and that we've learnt a lot from their work and thoughts. So Alex has been doing research and doing various kind of publication projects, which we'll perhaps ask a little more about as we go, and also to do a lot to put that audio culture into the world, which is partly what we're doing tonight, and we'll come to the record that we're launching here. And that Chris is generally somebody that we might claim to be a pioneer because of a journey that he made, which we're going to hear a little bit more about, and that those kind of sources and that kind of research has been really kind of vital to us. So perhaps, Chris, if you'd like to, you could kick off.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is something I originally wrote for Go Ost, that's been adapted for tonight. But there's so much done then, I'm marginally less naive than them now. These reflections begin under the shadow of Giewont. It's the mountain nicknamed the Sleeping Giant that overlooks Zakopane in Poland. I started visiting Zakopane, a mountain holiday resort south of Krakow, around 1988, making the first of many pilgrimages to the home of Stanislav Ignacy Witkiewicz, aka Witkacy, the artist, playwright, philosopher, prankster, catastrophist, and by many accounts all-round pain in the ass, whose fabulous dystopian novel Insatiability had been recommended to me by Marek Cohen, the UK writer with a Polish family background. Witkacy lived out his artistic and philosophical pursuit of pure form with a psychedelic bent through his experiments with alcohol, nicotine, ether, and mind-bending hallucinogenics like peyote. He did all this against the backdrop of a disintegrating Europe. And Witkacy finally killed himself in September 1939, when his catastrophist prophecies were fulfilled by Hitler and Stalin, dividing up Poland between them. Which is to say, Witkacy was exactly right for his times and feels just as right for yours and mine. Since that mind-blowing encounter with his novel Insatiability, Witkacy and his work have retroactively served and continue to serve as a personal spirit guide to my past, present and future times in pre- and post-1989 Eastern Europe. And that's not only because one of the most striking characters in Insatiability is Putricides, a composer whose stunted body and stiff little fingers rendered him almost incapable of realizing his brilliantly perverse psychedelic noise music. Some 40 years after Witkacy completed his monstrous creations in 1927, the Czech capital of Prague was perceived by the UK pop weekly newspaper NME, that's short for New Musical Express, as a worldwide psychedelic centre of a wholly more benign character. In the early 90s, I spent a few days in the NME archives going through the bound yearly volumes from 1964 to 1970. It's a weekly paper, by the way, while researching an article about Scott Walker. At that time, my love of Scott's music had been sealed by The Old Man's Back Again, brackets, dedicated to the neo-Stalinist regime. This is a song from his 1969 album, Scott 4. That song alluded to the summer of 1968 when Warsaw-packed troops crushed the Prague Spring, and with it Czechoslovakia's dream of finding an alternative socialist way. But the big revelation from these researchers had nothing to do with Scott Walker. It was a discovery that sometime in 1967, NME began running a regular newsletter from Prague. This other regular column was a newsletter from San Francisco, which is to say, for a while, NME perceived Prague, capital of communist Czechoslovakia, along with San Francisco, to be one of the two world centres of psychedelia. NME's Prague newsletter didn't end in August 1968. It stopped sometimes in early 1969. And by November 1980, when I visited Prague for the first of NME's two-part Trans-Europe Express Eastern European special features, the psychedelic spirit had gone deep underground. The 1960s Prague newsletter monitored the music of groups like the Primitives, forerunners of the iconic Czech group Plastic People of the Universe. I met Plastic People's Josef Janicek, who patiently answered my rather naive questions about how the group could continue to operate under extreme duress, subject to continual police surveillance, arrest, imprisonment, and vindictive vengeful acts, such as having a cottage burned down after the authorities discovered they'd played a secret gig there. Unsurprisingly, Plastic People's music grew progressively darker and more intense. That's a good thing about Eastern European psychedelia, the kind of psychedelia we're talking about. It's not all Itchy Park, what did you do there, we got high. The music of their new contemporaries like Killheads and Extempore, both featuring Nicholas Chadema, wasn't exactly brighter, but both carried large doses of Dada absurdism that at once reflected, undermined, and overturned the oppressive conditions the musicians had to live through daily. Prague 1980 also had its punk bands, the most notable of which were Zikkurat, about whom I was told plenty, but never got to meet or even hear until recently, Dog Soldiers and NRGG, who are featured in this article, Trans-Europe Express, which I wrote at the time. By the end of this first visit to Prague, my initial positive impressions of the city had been completely overturned, with musicians and artists having to cope with oppressive measures. The only half-decent group with a semi-legal status was the oppositely named classic rock and roll band, yet they were also under threat of being banned by the authorities for being too rock and roll, lewd, rude, etc. By the time I boarded the overnight train from Budapest, I'd become so paranoid I was sorely tempted to turn around and head back west. But I needn't have worried. Compared to the heavily suffocating atmosphere hanging over underground Prague, the Budapest scene I visited a week later felt like a playground paradise. But even in its more open climate, people would occasionally raise their hands to hide their mouths from prying, lip-reading informants' eyes when speaking to a foreigner in public places. And the prevailing mood among the city's musicians and artists was likely to plummet and spiral high. The congenial late filmmaker Gabor Boldi, whose 1980s cult film Psyche featured West German actor Udo Kier, fresh from his starring roles in Andy Warhol and Paul Morris's Frankenstein and Dracula films. Well, Gabor Boldi introduced me to Attila Grandpierre, leader of, okay, I'm not going to be able to say this correctly, Baktasho Halot Kemek, or as we say in English, Galloping Coroners. This was a few nights after the singer had tried to kill himself. With his wrist rupturing bandages, Attila calmly and kindly answered my innocent questions about the meanings and motivations of the bizarre folk rock group he had founded in 1975, blindly flashed out in his absence the night he was recovering in hospital. Then he politely requested if he could ask me a question. What were Blue Cheer doing now, he asked. That is, in the winter of 1980. Sadly, I didn't have an answer. Back in 1980, the other key Budapest underground group, the communist entity kept talking about, was Beyond, whose live-act-like over-identification with a totalitarian organism, be it Stalinist or Hitlerite, resulted in one of their founders, Gregor Davidov, going into exile in Paris rather than risk the wrath of the state's displeasure. This was all caused by this Beyond song about Anna Frank dancing with her killers. I never got to hear those early Beyond songs back then, even when I met Gregor in Paris on the final leg of my return trip to the UK. I'd have been disappointed if I had. Never mind Beyond's over-identification with the totalitarian regime. totalitarian organism. More problematic was Gregor's over-identification with Joel Grey, the MC from Cabaret. The 1970s Hollywood invocation of the Christopher Isherwood's stories of Weimar Berlin. And he also had an unhealthy, far too unhealthy love of Malcolm McLaren's messages. But other Hungarian music I encountered has aged much, much better. In particular, above all, the voice of Jenő Miniat of URH. I still recall his one-song performance of the great underground hit Bon Bon Si Bon Bon, any numbers of versions which now can be found on YouTube. I heard this first at a Budapest party. Jenő was seated, legs crossed, on a low wooden stool, supported by the a cappella mouthings of two members of a group called Balaton. His voice barked itself into a terse rant along the lines of too many police, too few whores, and back to too many whores, too few policemen. In an attempt to recapture that moment, I went looking for Miniat on the record. Eventually I found an Akademie Cal, a 2013 set by his later group Osteuropa. Their 1980s albums, Pop Saner, Love 82 and Joles 84 are highly recommended records. And the only way I can describe them is imagine Roxy Music's first album being ravaged by a 1977 punk riot and coming out alive by ducking through a hole into a future of their own devising. Back in the here and now, his voice is every bit as emotionally captivating as it was in 1980. And I'm totally won over by a track called Enek As, okay, excuse my terrible Hungarian pronunciation. Enek As Swobanak, the album's stingingly sung Hungarian translated cover version of Bob Dylan's Shelter from the Storm. I ran the Hungarian title through a Google Translate just to confirm what I was hearing. It came out as an Orun, which felt about exactly right. 35 years later, East and West might be almost the same, but in the final count, they're still just that little bit far apart. So let's close with an acid flashback. In 1978, in the UK, the big punky reggae hit was Tapazuki's MPLA. People heard it as being about the popular movement for the liberation of Angola, even if in truth it had little to nothing to say about the people's struggle for independence from Portuguese colonisation. Meanwhile, the smash hit films of 78 between 1978 and 80 were America's soul-searching post-Vietnam defeat movies, The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now. Both of them were heavy on the damage done by said defeat to the US side, even as they expressed little to no regret about the people the US failed to bomb into surrender. A few years later, during the Falklands War with Argentina, UK forces sunk the Argentine ship General Belgrano, killing more than 300 men. Travelling on the ground in Eastern Europe was always an ambivalent experience. Encounters with musicians and artists in Prague and Budapest, earlier in Ljubljana in non-aligned Yugoslavia, and later in Poznan, Warsaw, Krakow, East Berlin, and again, frequently to meet Laibach and Ljubljana, were never less than exciting, exhilarating, immensely moving, and every so often unnerving, and once or twice, heart and mouth frightening. But these trips were never undertaken with the feeling that the West was somehow better. Were we morally superior? Certainly not. The Soviet bloc, China and Cuba backed all the right sides in the people's liberation struggles around the world, even if their outcomes were often as not inglorious. Okay, utopia by definition must forever remain a dream away from reality. Utopia, it appears, is only attainable by wielding a heavy stick, destroying it in the very moment of its creation. So.
Thank you so much. I did something slightly unfair to Chris, which was I turned up with the piece that he wrote, which is really amazing. And I've persuaded him that he might read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs as well, which are set here in Berlin. So this was published in January 1989.
A very corny headline. Very corny.
That's probably the worst headline ever.
It really is, it really is.
Checkmate the frustrations of sharing a party line.
Yeah, and this is why we have extemporaries. Remember, Mirko on it. The Gorentosbahnhof station in Berlin, in Berlin's Russian sector is a somber introduction to the East, but its third-man gloom is offset by the bustling companionship of travellers waiting for the Prague-Budapest Express. Westerners, me included, can't hide an aura of uneasy anticipation that manifests itself in nervous glances from the clock to the train indicator. Not that there's any real threat, just a feeling brought on by the sudden alienating loss of colour on crossing the wall. Eventually relieved by the train's arrival, I enter a compartment full of young army conscripts who inquisitively look me over before continuing their raucous replay of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times screened on East German TV the night before. They were really tickled by the scene in which Charlie is nailed by the cops for political agitation when all he did was innocently pick up a red flag fallen from the back of a lorry. And just when they're looking forward to the next week's gold rush, someone dampens their spirits by reminding them of a parade the same night. Exit soldiers enter a sailor and his friend heading for a weekend in Budapest. Why Budapest, I ask? It's a lot more relaxed there, they reply, than expecting to travelling west. East Germany, one big jail, murmurs one silently. And for young people it's a long sentence until retirement when you can finally leave the country. And that's rendered all the more frustrating by their ready access to West German media. Eager to talk music, the duo regularly watch the West German rock marathon Rock Palast, which brings them as close as they can get to the live gigs by the likes of Patti Smith and the Police. Leaving the comfort of the train compartment, I say goodbye to the Germans and whisper a tentative hello to Prague.
Great, thank you very much. As we might ask 1 or 2 questions of Chris, is that right? And then we'll move on, Alex, to the rest.
Actually, I would suggest that we have to present the project, because it's really fresh, came on Thursday from the printing plant. This compilation, Unearthing the Music, presents notes from the underground. Maybe I have to mention that there's a constellation in the back. Unearthing the Music is this online project, which was running for 1 year. We hope that we can continue because it's actually a nice attempt to cover experimental music of all kinds from 57 to 89. Actually promised under European totalitarianism. In the beginning I thought, oh, it comes from Portugal, might include Portugal and Spain and Greece, but well, they only got money for the East. However, that's my job, so of course I agreed, I was happy to work with them, but we could only scratch the surface in a way. And they promised to do a publication, and I said, come on, the name is Unearthing the Music, so let's do it. And well, then I met Daniel, who invited me to Which for the first installation of the exhibition. And I said, oh, because I was thinking already about how to put together a compilation. This is impossible, actually. So, and since there was already an exhibition, a pre-selection, so to say, I said, okay, let's do the audio catalog. Already limited by the pre-selection, and we just show actually the audio side of the stuff which is exhibited. Well, that's what we've done, as you know, all together, and now it's here. And a lot of stuff Chris mentioned is finally on vinyl here as well. Maybe to give a little idea of how it sounded like in Prague. Let me play maybe like 30 seconds of DJ 307. This is actually something like, not a side project of the Plastic People, but some Plastic People members were involved. It's basically a project of a poet, Pavlis Ajicek, who actually went to prison together with the Plastic People members, which then caused the founding of the Charta 77. So you see, everything is connected, politics and music. And this is something like early poetic industrial, I would even dare to say.
What's the date of this?
This is, as far as I remember, 73, September, live recording, illegal show.
73, confirmed.
73
Confirmations from the floor.
From the headquarters. monastery somewhere in the countryside.
They take their name from a classification of
Yes.
psychiatric disorder.
Yeah, which was something to achieve, to get in order to get rid of the army.
So I wonder, like, you were hinting, Chris, at a kind of dark psychedelia, right?
Yep.
That could be the darkest psychedelia imaginable.
That is dark psychedelia, but I think psychedelia anyway is a dark thing. So if you listen to the Grateful Dead, for instance, you listen to Dark Star, that takes you places, that goes to the deepest, darkest, furthest reaches of the universe, I would say. It's not a comfortable, itchy-cookie pop type thing. I think psychedelia is a dark music, but because it takes you somewhere and opens up another space, that's what's really positive and what's great about psychedelic music. And in places like in Prague, for instance, where things got really, really heavy, psychedelia is a perfect way of exploring and also finding an escape route from that, even if it's only temporary. Yeah. And also because it messes around with time, like it expands in a second into 1,000 years and vice versa. So maybe time becomes meaningless. Maybe those 30 years, maybe the years from 1945 to 1989 are not so long if you approach them through psychedelics. Possibly.
Okay. I'm wondering whether you feel, Alex, that this compilation has some of that darkness that Chris is pointing to, whether that would be a persistent thing running throughout the compilation or not.
In a way, yes, but the darkness you can enjoy, of course. There are also moments of pop, I would say, popping up. Even some danceable stuff.
Exactly.
So,
I
but
think,
of course, people like to dance in the dark.
Also, I think when we're talking about psychedelia and darkness, we're talking about Dadaism, we're talking about absurdism, and the way psychedelia connects these and just blows them apart, opens them up. So I think absurdism and Dadaism are sources of pleasure in the face of ugliness as well. So
I think actually for the show, that's also really very important. For an audience who perhaps don't have a great understanding or an interest even in the kind of musical and art cultures of East Europe in the 1980s, probably a preconception would be that this was a kind of grey and dark world. But that show is not really a grey and dark world, right? And some of the music on this compilation is distinctly not grey and dark. It has, as you said, dance music on it, and a kind of desire to kind of liberate your mind and the body, perhaps despite those difficult circumstances. Do you want to pick another track for us?
Yeah, maybe yet another example for dark psychedelia. A band which also got mentioned, Maktazo Halat Gemek, Galloping Coronas. Goes like this.
and please read out their German name.
Rasende Leichenbeschauer.
Ja, das nächste Lied, Krebs ohne Stuhl, Krebs ohne Stuhl, Krebs.
It's wrong, das ist demokratischer Konsum.
The Dada Brain.
fill in a little bit of background for us. So it's Hungarian.
Hungarian space rock, you could even say, founded in '75, founded by scientists. The singer Attila Krampje is his real name. Is an astrophysician, member of the Academy of Science. Today, unfortunately, a bit right-winged, esoteric, but it was already there in the back, you could say. Heavily inspired by Bartók and the creation out of non-consciousness. But from '78 on, they were in a way seen as a punk band. So '78 had the first performance under the flag of punk in public, and a young journalist, Tamás Zeni, wrote about it. This in a way shows the differences, which is also very important, which you show in the exhibition, which we tried to show here, especially for punk. In this book, also Punk Pact, Warsaw Punk Pact. Cultural politics were very different when you compare Hungary and GDR, or Romania, or Albania.
I mean, cultural politics in relation to punk.
In relation to underground alternative music or pop culture per se. So, in Hungary, for instance, even though until '84 also bands ended up imprisoned and so on, there were punk shows, there were posters on the streets, there were punk boutiques for East German punks, very important. There was in a way also the subculture shopping window to the West. So it looked like a paradise compared to the GDR or other countries. And it started at least in the early '70s that they liberalized cultural politics, which has also something to do with liberalizing of economics of small businesses. And the same goes for Poland, but Poland, which I have to mention at least 4 times. In Poland, the cultural politics were, compared to the other countries, liberalized already in the early '50s, right after the death of Stalin.
But the interesting thing with punk, though, is that even what we might see as the most liberal countries in the region, so particularly thinking about Yugoslavia, they too had a moment of controversy and conflict over punk.
Well, they had controversy and conflict over punk in London, you know, in the UK. Punks got beaten up, you know.
And actually over some precisely the same
things, absolutely.
Use of the swastika and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because when you were there, it's obviously not the end of the 70s, or 1980, isn't it?
Yep, 1980, yeah.
So punk's really extremely current then in that Eastern European context?
Yeah, but the number of punks you see were very limited. The punk groups were interested in kind of like ostrich, in kind of Mohican haircuts or anything like this. They were punk and attitude, punk and what they were doing musically. But they weren't so genre bound, you could say. Like as Alex said, Galloping Coroners began as a space rock group, then became a kind of folkish group, and then later on that folkishness turned ugly and became a bit nationalistic. But also, Galloping Coroners, they toured in the UK, and when they did tour, and when I saw them in Germany, in West Berlin, their singer was kind of covered in straw, like he was a straw man who came on the stage. And I mean, really fast straw, he could hardly move before he started playing, so they were deeply rooted in folkish elements, but they were playing as a punk group, because probably a normal rock club wouldn't take them, maybe, perhaps.
Here's a proposition though, maybe the kind of linear narratives that we like to tell as stories about the development of music, that one thing follows another, don't really kind of hold up in Eastern Europe, perhaps because things don't arrive in a nice kind of tidy order. And I'm thinking about Bitsotzak, the band that wanted to call themselves jazz punks. And in a British context, jazz and punk would really seem to be a kind of long way apart, with maybe a few exceptions.
Yeah, but then we did have No Way, which brought jazz and punk together very well in New York.
Right.
In New York. But also the interesting thing about Bishatak, they had the initials RE, Albert Einstein, and that was a way of making them look Albert Einstein Committee to give it, take it maybe away, make it a little less political, which is quite an interesting, quite a funny thing. So there's humour there as well, but I don't think the bands were genre bound in any way. So you'd have groups like die Törligadores playing in Budapest, Einstürzen der Neubauten playing in Budapest, Testdepartment playing in Budapest, with Hungarian groups on those bills.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at the time, it was almost impossible to collect this music from the outside because it wasn't being released. It was circulating through tapes or through, and of course there will be some records later on Hungariton or in Poland on the Polish label. Amiga, I don't think released anything apart from Bob Dylan, which was absolutely fine, of course, but except it wasn't fine and they weren't releasing DDR music. But in Czechoslovakia, did anybody get released in Czechoslovakia, interestingly, by 1989?
From 87 on.
87 on, yeah.
Sam, tell us about the status of these recordings. Are we listening to things that once had public life, or are these tapes that were simply just made privately for the bands and so on? I imagine it's a mix, but
yeah, it's a mix. Totally different stories involved, like the already mentioned Ibiza or Bagdasar can make two bands which you see in a GDR in a movie by Gabobodi, Nazi on the Dog. So they were in a way known. The records of Ibiza you could buy in East Berlin at the Cultural Center at Künste. But of course you didn't get any Galloping Coronas, but the Galloping Coronas and Ibiza from 84 on performed also in the West. And invited by the Turkish and then made records in the West. 85, a compilation of Ibiza material and Galloping Coronas from 88 on.
Galloping Coronas released
at the end,
records on
Alternative Tentacles, the punk label in a way, for many people. So we got stuff like this, like the Galloping Corona is from the Alternative Tentacles, released from 90 or 91. The Ibiza track we have is unreleased. It's music for the last unfinished movie of Gavobodi.
the Borghese track is interesting.
The Borghese
It's a very
track
early piece.
It's a very early piece, actually also in a way unreleased, and we released it with yet another so-called Sonic Spezial, so Sonic's magazine, introduced in 93, and also this punk book is yet another Sonic Spezial. And
Alex, I think it'd be important to explain the difference between Yugoslavia and West Eastern Europe.
Like the track is like an early demo recording. Borghese produced in Italy, so the first record came in Italy. But this track, in a different version, came on a compilation called 84, right in 84, the Orwellian year. And on a cover of this compilation were Leibach. But Leibach in 84, you could only announce, at least carrying the name of Leibach. There were side projects of Leibach on the record, and there were 35 seconds of Leibach, the introduction to the track Jaroselski. But well, it came out, and Yugoslavia is yet another story, totally different. You had a lot of different labels in each republic, a major label for each republic, you could say, but even smaller independents. The cultural politics and politics of socialism in Yugoslavia was totally different.
And Yugoslavs could travel to the West. And
they could travel to the West, like the first punk band behind Eric Kurt, now they call themselves Punkriti. They heard about the new thing, punk in London, so they just bought tickets and went to London, and then made their own version out of it. So, I mean, for punks in GDR, it was impossible to imagine. Yeah, some stuff is unreleased, some stuff comes from very limited tape editions in the 80s, Magnetista, how it was called in the Soviet Union, so underground releases on tape or real tape, like NSRD from Riga. There's stuff coming from a more like arty point of view into pop culture, but also the other way around. So.
And you can see the NSRD tapes in the show,
yeah.
which are magnetic tapes which have been pretty much copied by putting two machines together, and the cover artwork is done by hand. So that testifies to a kind of DIY quality that's often celebrated in punk, but in a very, very different context.
That's yet another 20 seconds of NSRD to give an idea. No. the wrong record. Sorry. Yeah,
Well, while you're
it's
changing the
live
record,
business, yeah.
while you're changing the record, could you explain to us, did groups sell their own cassettes and stuff like this, or circulate their music through cassettes?
It was also, there were circulations, and at the end of the 80s, also because of, well, the chance of earning some money out of it. Even in the GDR in '84, the first band tried to sell a record, not a record, a tape, Klick und Aus. They openly claimed that they were influenced by the Golden Coronas, by the way, even on the States radio. And I think they were asking for like 40 marks, East German. And everybody said, you can't do this, so nobody will pay it. It worked. So there was a market, of course. I mean, people were really into, well, getting whatever they could. I mean, when they get to Hungary, they had to spend a lot of money, East German money, for a record, like 100 marks or something like that.
The other East German cassette I had from the same series, I have that Klick and Aus one. There was one
It's Cards.
Yeah, Straps is the other one.
Happy Straps.
Happy Straps,
Yeah.
that's right. Who were they?
Happy Straps was more like a dark wave band. They got published in '85. On it, there was a compilation in West Berlin, Life in Paradise, DDR. And this was basically stuff recorded by one guy there were a few people recording, and some went to the bands, to the rehearsal rooms or wherever they performed, or live performances. Thorsten Philipp was his name, and some had like, something like a studio, which made a maybe a 4-track recorder which didn't work, and one echo, and this what they call black devils in East German plastic mics. And that guy went to the West and took some material with him and published it on a very small indie label in West Berlin. But in order to, in a way, save the band from any possible harm, the names were not mentioned on the cover. So, from his recordings, by the way, we've got Demokratischer Konsum, what you just heard, Krebs ohne Stuhl, announcement. Well, 30 seconds of NSRD from Riga. Yeah, NSRD, mir ist ja in German, Werkstatt zur Wiederherstellung nie gefühlter Gefühle. You can give the English
it's for the restoration.
workshop or restoration unfelt feelings.
Unfelt feelings.
Yeah. Really, really funny collective, and also then later on they played an important role in establishing a rave culture in the Soviet Union. They invited Westbem. Westbem met Eastbem. Yeah, that's the story, and the track is named Ost-West as well. So
there's something interesting there about NSRD, because the principal figure, Lenich, had access to various bits of kit because he was involved, I think he was on the margins of scientific research. He was a kind of an administrator in a science setup. And then we know that the new composers, they also sort of set up the first, what we might see as rave nights, by persuading the director of the planetarium in Leningrad that actually what they were organising was a science club for young people. They were going to look at the stars. They got the planetarium for the night and they turned it into a nightclub. So there's this sort of, I think there's a couple of interesting things there. It's sort of improvisation by playing with the margins of what's possible within a system. And then it's also this kind of appeal of science, which is kind of curious as well, right? Because science gives you access to things that are hard to find elsewhere. Like maybe you want to make a bit of electronic kit, you know, maybe you improvise, you make it yourself. Tell us about the new composers.
Yeah, let me introduce new composers. Giving Shostakovich a special treatment. Shostakovich, Leningrad Symphony, and they are from Leningrad. So, well, it's something to do if you're from Leningrad to deal with the Fate Symphony this way. Well, new composers belong to this like artist circles of Leningrad, boheme, or how we want to call it, hipsters, and we're very early into obviously the cut-up strategies, industrial, but also dance music.
So
that's why they got into rave then.
What date is that piece we just
85.
Right.
Pretty early. Later on it got a bit softer. So. And they cooperated with Sergei Kuryov, a very important figure to mention, the genius of the scene, who played a very interesting role then in the early 90s when he was one of the big supporters of the National Bolshevik Party in Leningrad. So.
Alex, do you have any thoughts about gender on the compilation? Because we thought a lot about gender in the exhibition.
Well, Portuguese is the big example, but a huge example of that it was possible to talk about gender, about, in their case, about gay rights in the early 80s already. They had their own club, Fabre, connected to their own label and so on, and they made the first gay parties behind the Iron Curtain, you could say, as far as I know. And we're dealing openly with all these issues in their videos. They were video pioneers as well, and played a very important role in establishing the topic. In the other countries, it was much less. So, I mean, in the punk book, we tried to find. It was almost impossible to find female punk bands, all female punk bands or post-punk bands all over the block. So at the beginning, I thought it was just one in Prague, Plyn, the little Kotibok, and then Zubinetti. But then it turned out there were other two in Estonia. But that's it.
Maybe one or two others in Slovenia as well.
In Slovenia, again, was much more comparable on all levels to the West. So those are radical. Tojibabe, I have to mention that. They were close to Portuguese. So.
Hungary had well, women singers, if anyone whose name immediately strikes, I can remember Agnes Camondi, who did really good interpretations. She did a set of, later, after 1989, a set of cover versions of big songs from the 1980s, Hungarian 1980s, including tracks by Unearthing. But do you know that, Mr. Martin?
Coming towards the end of our time, Alex, you want to pick one more thing for us that we'll just listen to before we finish
Yeah,
up?
let me look. What else is interesting? Maybe which side do we are now? See. Maybe something Polish.
Special request from the Polish man in the front row.
Something unreleased, Pravdata. Real Underground, Orwellian year, 84, Leipzig. Approach and giving commands. Very interesting project, East German project, cooperation between punks from Leipzig and fine artists like Hans-Jürgen Schulze and for me a very important figure, Holger Lukas, today working for Radio 1 as a music chief. Live in Coswig at Intermedia 1, there was never a second edition, for obvious reasons, as you might understand now. And yet again...
That was Polish.
That was Polish, of course. Because I said 4 times. Third, sorry. Poland wins. This is cuteness. Yet another. Chris was talking about films in Prague, and now. then they took him away. Really.
And perhaps that's the note that we should finish on. Alex, thank you very much for introducing us to those tracks, and Chris for sharing your memories with us as well. I imagine there's an opportunity people would like to buy the LP.
This is capitalism.
Yeah. So to catch Alex to do that. Thank you very much.